Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is American Photographic Artist Biz Talk. APA is a not-for-profit professional organization of photographers working in advertising, commercial, and editorial. It's a volunteer organization, and these programs are put together by our members. Darcie Adler of the Spin Style, sorry about that, is on the APA Atlanta board, and she put together this awesome panel and made this happen today. So we welcome, if you're a member and you have ideas about what you'd like to see, you can let us know. There's also a survey that we have when you log on to apanational.org where you can view that survey and fill it out and let us know what you're thinking. I will also put in the chat a version that's available for non-members. We'd love to hear what you think APA could be doing as well. So I will put that in the chat. I'll also put in a link to sign up for our emails in case you're not already getting news of upcoming events. I'll be here. I'll be in the background hiding with looking at your questions, and we will either ask them during or at the end. I'm going to hand the talk over to our moderator today, Darcie Adler. And did I say, I'm Juliet Wolf-Robin. I'm the APA National Executive Director, in case I didn't say who I was. This will also be on the APA YouTube channel. So if you miss anything, you can get it later or let us know. Thank you very much. Darcie?
Thank you, Juliet. Hi, and welcome. My name is Darcie Adler, and I'm the founder of the Spin Style agency based in Atlanta. I want to thank everyone who registered to join our call today. I value our community, and my desire is to help bring us together to develop open communication to support each other. We are approaching a longer road with COVID than some of us anticipated. It will be a whole lot easier to navigate together. I'm here with an incredible group of people who have graciously joined me to help shed some light on what I would sum up as our current messy times. I'm tremendously flattered to be talking with all of you today. Thank you for joining me. If you would, please introduce yourself and speak a bit about who you are and what you do. Let's start with Art.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning and supporting the APA. And thank you, Darcie, for asking me to join the call. I'm a photographer based in Los Angeles. I work mostly in entertainment, commercial, and editorial. And for the last, I think it's 8 months now, I have just been trying to maintain some equilibrium, push ahead, go deep into my archive, and adjust to shooting under all kinds of new safety protocols.
Thank you. Melanie, let's go to you next.
Hi, I'm Melanie Acevedo. I'm a photographer living in New York. I basically do lifestyle and portraiture. I do a lot of advertising, some editorial, catalog as well. Darcie, thank you so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be part of this great group of people, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thanks. And Liz, how about you?
Hi there, I'm Liz Von Haney. I'm a fashion and lifestyle photographer that is based in New York and in Atlanta. My representation is with B&A in New York, but I live and reside here in Atlanta. So for me, these last 8 months have really been kind of rediscovering more of finding my way, working locally with people that I've known and have worked with casually over 20 years. But literally the last 8 months, it's almost like reinventing my teams and reinventing a focus while still producing work, but instead of doing it in New York or in LA, it's been producing it here locally in Atlanta, which has been fabulous. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Gaytana.
Thank you, Darcie. I'm honored to be here today. My name is Gaytana Carrino. I am based in Chicago. I work with a company called APR, which is a production consulting company. My background is actually in photography and producing. I was a producer for like 20 plus years, and I've been with APR for about 10 years. And we work on the client side with clients and agency partners, sort of helping them in their production ecosystem.
And Cindy.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. My name is Cindy Debabneh. I work for McDonald's Corporate as the studio production manager based in Chicago. And I hate saying Chicago because then you automatically know where I'm from. So I have been at McDonald's Corporate for about 6 years now. And before that, I actually worked for the Oprah Winfrey Show. So full circle, back in the same building. And I'm currently managing our studio at the headquarters, as well as our production center in LA. I help manage all of our food stylists, work with all of our agencies to make sure they're following brand guidelines. So I work very closely with Gaytana at APR. So couldn't do my job without her. So.
You know.
Thank you. And Luigi?
Hey everybody, my name is Luigi Menduni. I am an agent over at Bernstein and Julie, and I have the pleasure of working with Miss Liz von Haney. So thank you to Darcie to putting this together and having me join and kind of give my perspective on what it's like to be an agent in the time of COVID and all the necessary and painstaking steps we take in order to create safe production. So I'm looking forward to sharing my input and hearing, sharing my thoughts and hearing everybody's input in during the talk.
Thank you. And John Cogan.
Hi guys, I'm John Cogan. I'm a producer and agent. I own a company called Good Noise, goodnoisephoto.com. I represent a small group of pretty kick-ass photographers and produce ads, editorial shoots, whatever content anybody needs. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about this with you guys as everything changes yet again in our industry. Thanks for having me, Darcie.
Mm-hmm. And last but not least, Ed.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Ed Gilman from AP Insurance. Probably the least creative person on the call, but I hope to be able to answer some questions and give some insight regarding the insurance aspect of what's happening in the world today, especially as it relates to photographers, videographers. We are the exclusive endorsed insurance agency for APA, and we handle 1,000+ photographers in the country, all over, every state. So good to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. Thank you. Toward the end of September, the Atlanta APA chapter hosted a panel, Shooting and Producing in a Pandemic. Questions were submitted and the discussion went down as planned until Liz von Haney asked an unexpected and critical question to the group. What happens if the photographer gets sick? It became clear that no one was totally prepared for that conversation. When things opened back up after quarantine, everyone eagerly put on their masks and their blinders and said, let's do this. Our producers meticulously created safe sets, PPE in place, medics on set, clear zones specified, and warnings posted. We had thought of everything, or had we? What if the photographer tests positive the day before the shoot or starts showing symptoms on set? Then what? No one really wanted to think about the what if. It turns out that some pretty terrible things can happen if you aren't willing to ask the tough questions. Some of our panelists will be sharing a few cases where things didn't unfold in a favorable manner. Let's talk about this. Now is the time to problem solve and troubleshoot, not the day you test positive. Tough questions don't always have a single answer, but our panelists can share their experiences, good and bad, to help APA members start crafting their own. I urge you to take notes. We are going to be covering a lot of material. We will cover 5 main questions. A couple of the questions will be covered from the viewpoint of the photographer, and again from the viewpoint of the client. The questions are, number 1, tell us what happened. Number 2, does insurance cover this? Number 3, searching for your plans B, C, and D. Number 4, how do I get these numbers approved? And number 5, how can I secure business during COVID? I urge you to engage with us as we make our way through these questions. Juliet will navigate the Q&A, and if she doesn't pop in with your question in the middle of the subject, she may still approach it toward the end of our call. We really want to make this informative for you, so don't be afraid to engage. Okay, let's get started. Question 1, tell us what happened. What stories can you share where COVID got in the way of a smooth and seamless production? This could be an experience where you were directly involved in, or in a situation you are simply aware of. Gaytana, let's start with you.
Okay. Yeah, so at APR, we sit in a unique position because we work across, many clients, across many industries. So fortunately or unfortunately, as we've all moved back to production, we've seen a lot of instances of hiccups and learnings along the way. A couple that pop into mind were very early. Once LA started to reopen, we had a shoot that was happening. It was a big shoot, it was a large cast, a crew. It was like a shoot pre-COVID. There were safety protocols that were put in place. There was a health and safety officer, and it was day 2 of, I think, a 4 or 5 day shoot. And a crew member checks in to get, his temperature checked, and he had a fever. So the health and safety officer sent him home, told him to get tested, and then production and the photographer were sort of figuring out, what do we do? Do we need to bring in another crew member? Can we continue shooting? What needs to happen? And at that point, a couple of crew members said, we're not comfortable going back on set until we know he's tested negative. Like, we don't feel comfortable. So it started off a whole chain of, wait, what happens? Who makes this decision? Does the health and safety officer shut the shoot down? It ran up the chain, client and agency weren't there. So it ran up the chain. Finally, it got to the client's legal department. And because it was a big shoot, it was a multi-day shoot, it involved shooting children. The client just decided, and their legal decided they did not want to risk that. So they shut down the shoot that day. There were cost implications as a result. And then there was also, how do we reschedule what needed to get shot on the back end? And, as we kind of worked through this and started to realize there's like questions that we need to sort of answer up front, it also became apparent, maybe this person should have just because he had a fever doesn't mean he was positive necessarily. He might have come out of a hot car, and maybe he should have just sat somewhere for a little while and got retested. But it led to a lot of questions on the back end. And just another quick one too that had happened. That one was out in LA. This one was in New York. So both coasts. This one, I don't know how you would have planned for it, but we were shooting roommates who lived together in an apartment. So, they had been in their COVID bubble. We were utilizing a lot of their wardrobe, a lot of their props. And as they were starting to show wardrobe over the live feed to the client, the internet went down, not in the apartment, but in the whole entire neighborhood. So there was a bit of a scramble, and how are we now presenting things to the client, to the agency to get approval? So again, the photographer and her crew were really nimble and were able to kind of save that day.
So I'm curious if I can ask, in the first situation out in LA, when the shoot was closed down, kind of what was the resolution? Who was sort of stuck with the cost, and then how did you guys kind of get back and capture what you needed to capture, and how long did it take to do that?
Yeah, the production team was amazing and the photographer was amazing. So the client was stuck with the cost. It was almost as if it would have been a weather day, where the client would have to pay for a weather day. So the client had to adhere the costs for the day that was canceled, as well as picking up the costs on the back end for the extra day. So the production team scrambled. They tried to make deals with, locations that weren't used during that day, and get the best deals they can for the shoot. And luckily we were able to sort of tack on a day right at the very end of the shoot. And by the way, the crew member ended up testing negative.
Oh,
which was very good for him.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions for Gaytana before I move on? Okay. Melanie, you had some interesting input on this.
I don't have any experience personally with having something go down on set that wasn't, that no one was prepared for, or something nothing has come up that's been sort of a huge issue. But what I have heard from other producers, the whole live feed thing is fantastic, but it can also cause a lot of problems on set if people aren't super aware and hyper vigilant about conversations they're having on set. When you have a client listening in, you have to be really careful about what's going on set. And two producers, friends of mine, have told me about situations where the photographer is saying really negative things about the client, and the client's hearing everything. And that can really derail a shoot completely. And and this has happened a few times, and one shoot was kind of never able to get back on its legs in a good way. And I just think that the whole live feed thing can really, as it facilitates so much for us, it just definitely has to be managed really well. Crew has to be really, really aware of their behavior, more so than ever, because it's like everyone's watching, so you have to be really cool on set.
Yeah, that actually happens a lot lately. And so what we've been doing, since I'm on the client side, what the agencies have been doing is doing breakout rooms. So they put the client in a waiting room until they're absolutely ready to show what's on set, because you're right. I mean, crews, photographers, directors all have to be so cautious and careful. So we've been put into a lot of breakout rooms until they're ready to present.
Yeah.
And it works both ways, where the client creatives might be saying something about the talent or the model that they don't want the talent or the model to hear. And we're in a bit of a catch-22, because either the creatives and the client are talking into the earpiece of the photographer or the first AD or the producer or the first assistant or the digital tech, which means you're now in a game of telephone, or they are what I call the voice of God in the room. And if they're the voice of God in the room, that means you're not necessarily cranking the music. And it also means that one of these awkward moments can happen. And I think, and I don't think we're skipping ahead here, this is with us now. This is going to be a permanent part of our workflow, regardless of how and when we get out of this pandemic, because either clients are not going to fly as many people as they used to for budgetary reasons, or some people just aren't going to feel safe flying. So the zooming of the shoot this is one of the things that we are taking with us into the future.
I totally agree. This is not going away. I mean, we've now been educated to how easy it is to have clients have access to a set 100%. So it really takes the need out of having everybody come into the set now from God knows where. It just opens it up. And I agree. I don't think it's going anywhere. And in some ways, it's really great that's a possibility. I mean, it's less people on set,
Yeah, Melanie, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's not necessarily a terrible thing. But Art had a great point where it is oftentimes a game of telephone. I was just on set. Unfortunately, it wasn't a client thing, but it was a car shoot that we were shooting in Atlanta, multiple days. We were shooting in Charleston first and moved to Atlanta. And we had the car prep guy overhear a conversation where the client was bitching out the agency about the car prep guy. And it was one of those things on set where he just kind of pulled him aside and said, "Hey, look, Paul, I heard everything that you said on your phone conversation, because you're rallying 15 different on this particular any agency on set, but we did a client and we could not keep him away from the set." So he was like there the whole time. So to Melanie's point as well, the mute button is incredibly important. And, on this particular shoot, I was acting as both, AD and producer. And I just, the tech, I just hit him, I'd elbow him, mute. We had important needs their conversation. Everyone needs to speak on their own during these shoots.
John, we're having problems with your connection, so you're cutting out a bit.
I think we get the gist, though. I think his point is is clear. Make sure you mute things whenever necessary. If you're having these conversations, which we know we all sometimes need to have certain conversations on set that aren't for everybody's ears, that we have to be cautious around that. And Cindy, it's interesting that you're saying from the client side, it sounds like there's a comfort level with them being let in at when everybody's ready, which is always helpful, I think, for the creatives.
Yeah, absolutely. The creatives have kind of decided, and not all agencies do this with us, but certain ones, some of their creatives don't want us to be part of any conversation, which understandably so, but I also feel like sometimes that could hold up the shoot or waste time, because sometimes the conversations they're having, if they actually had specific conversations in front of the client, we would have established the shot. But again, it's really up to our creatives that we let them make that decision.
One thing to add really, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Luigi, you go first.
I was just gonna, one thing to add really quickly that I've seen happen on a bunch of my sets is having a witness cam. So there's kind of like this overarching camera that is showing the whole entire set. So that this way, if the client or the agency is in a breakout room, there still can be a view on what's happening on set. So you don't feel like you're completely disconnected from what's going on. So that's kind of another thing to see as people are kind of waiting to be reintroduced to the live feed on a digital tech screen, to see the capture station. So that's kind of another tip and trick that I've kind of come across that I wanted to share with everybody.
Yeah,
I like that. They feel included.
Just to build on that too, because I think it kind of ties in, is on a lot of calls too during the pre-pro, we'll sort of review like what is the communication protocol on set, and when should the client give feedback and how should they give feedback, and it kind of gets the agency and the production team sort of clear, because the client doesn't want to step over the creative. They want the creative to go first and then sort of support it. But if everyone sort of understands when and how they should give feedback, it makes it easier and less confusing on the day of.
Yeah, that's great. Those kind of conversations up front are so helpful. Okay, great. Well, I think we'll go on to question number 2, if everybody feels ready to move on. So question number 2 is, does insurance cover this? And I'm going to direct this to Ed. Ed, you were on APA's Biz Talk back in early May, and you ran through the 3 different types of insurance that people were asking about in relationship to COVID, which are workers' comp, general liability, and loss of business income. If a shoot is canceled last minute or in the middle of the shoot because the photographer has COVID, is it covered by any of these policies?
So there's been a lot of activity, obviously, in the insurance world related to the pandemic and COVID. And the 3 coverages are still very much applicable as far as conversation. There's been much more clarity regarding the workers' comp piece. And there are now approximately 23 states where there is a presumption of coverage if someone gets sick on the job. And that would relate to their workers' comp paying for medical expenses and loss of income to that individual. What's interesting is, just as an aside, I just saw today the statistics are showing 96% of all of these claims on the workers' comp side have been less than $3,500. So the good news is it's pretty mild. That being said, it's not going to cover the expense of the shoot being canceled that day or postponed. Then you've got the general liability piece, which in essence says that a third party could sue if someone contracted the virus and subsequently had a financial loss through bodily injury. Well, that's not really happening here either, in the sense that it's a financial loss, it's not a bodily injury loss. So general liability applies to bodily injury and property damage. What's interesting there, more clarity again, certain states, including Georgia, have come out with a pretty much ironclad defense against a liability lawsuit, as long as you post a particular sign at the entrance of the job site and or the workplace. It doesn't prevent anyone from suing, you still have the right to sue in this country, but it's pretty much the ability to have a get out of jail card. That being said, errors and omissions coverage, which we didn't talk about back in April or in August or any other time, really applies to a financial loss that might result from a error or omission of the photographer and or the agency and or anyone else involved in the creative side of the project. But again, error, no. Omission, no. Stupidity, maybe. But if I could sell stupid insurance, I'd have my own island, so I wouldn't be on this call with you. That being said, you go to the loss of income coverage. So that is a property coverage, which is where all of the lawsuits right now, there's over 1,500 going on in the country, from mainly restaurants and hospitality type industries, where, and actually also in the travel and convention side, where they are claiming that if you are shut down by either the virus itself and or the civil authority because of the threat of the virus, then they're saying there should be a business interruption or loss of income claim paid by the insurance carrier. Almost all the policies we sell that have property insurance have the loss of income coverage included. But so far, every single one of these claims has been denied by the insurance industry. And the main reason is that it specifically excludes two things. Number one, virus. And number two, there has to be some kind of property damage. So it's going to be a while before we see whether the insurance side of this actually responds to these type claims. As of right now, I would tell you there is no coverage in the event that a shoot is canceled or postponed due to the either threat and or actual appearance of the virus in one of the folks that are attending that event. So then you go to the last thing that you could talk about, which is an actual pandemic coverage for loss of income. And I was explaining to Darcie the other day, and I guess Juliet as well on the call, about the fact that, you know, the only smart group in the country, actually in the whole world, that had the coverage and kept the coverage was Wimbledon. And Wimbledon had been buying it for 20 years, paying $2 million a year for pandemic insurance. And they actually did receive a claim payment of $150 million. So their $40 million investment over 20 years paid off pretty good. But the Olympic Committee here in the U.S. actually was one of those not so smart folks. They had been paying it for the last 5 Olympics. That's 20 years. And this year they decided not to. And they lost. It's a bet. It's a bet. That's all you can do. So is there pandemic coverage now available to small businesses? No. There is a coverage out there, but it's really designed for larger entities and the Fortune 1000, type of structure or size. It's very expensive, obviously, and it's really not designed to do anything where we're talking about a shoot for a day or a week or even a month. It wouldn't be, it's cost prohibitive. So that's the answer, long answer to your short question.
Ed, could you tell us what should the sign say that they're going to have on the outside of their set?
So we can provide that to y'all. And I think I did actually to Juliet the other day. And this is only in Georgia. So again, every state is different. Certain states have no coverage or indemnification release for businesses at all. So in other words, if you want to sue, you actually could recover. General liability actually will respond to a lawsuit. For the most part, there's not an exclusion. If someone were to contract it, the problem is you've got to actually, prove that there's got to be tracing And there's got to be an absolute definitive answer as to where that individual contracted it. And again, what's the actual loss? You know, we were talking about maybe $3,500 thereabouts on average. So it's not really something where you're going to see a lot of lawsuits at this point. But to your point, we can provide that verbiage. It actually is a sign. It is very clearly stated in the law as to how big the font and the print needs to be, and it can be in mobile as well as in physical, actually hard copy form. So that's easy for us to provide to everybody.
Okay, I have a quick question in regards to crew members. This is for like a digitech, a photo assistant. Is there anything that crew members can do to protect themselves from not being compensated for a canceled shoot? Is there anything they can do in regards to communication with the producer up front in terms of being insured, making sure they're insured? Is there anything you recommend?
So I think if the question is, can they confirm that if they were to get sick on the site, that there would be coverage in place for them?
Right.
And that's going to come from two different areas. One is workers' comp, which is what we would be engaged in, and the other would be potentially some type of a short-term disability coverage. But normally you're not going to see that, especially as an independent contractor.
Right.
An independent contractor would be covered under workers' comp if there were no other coverage for them. And that's where, again, they would have to prove that they were actually sickened on the job and from someone that was on the job.
Okay.
It's not that you can just show up sick and say, I must have gotten it here. Doesn't work that way. So
Okay.
the burden of proof in the majority of states is on the individual. In the 23 states that have a presumption of injury, California is one of them, New York's another, they just have to say they were sick after the shoot. And then there would be coverage for them under workers' comp, providing there is workers' comp in place. And that's your real point, is they can, this is all about business at this point. Who's hiring who and who's working for whom, and making, demands when you're not necessarily in charge. It's a judgment call as to how far they want to take that.
Okay.
I will tell you that, just as an aside, in most states, if you have 2 or more employees, and or you have subs that are uninsured, independent contractors, you should be carrying workers' comp. Because ultimately, and I assume, Cindy, when you hire your creatives, you're requiring them to provide certificates of insurance that show certain types of coverage. Workers' comp, I would assume, is one of them.
Yeah, we don't allow any production without insurance.
Right.
So they're not allowed to come into our building. They're not allowed to really start the production. Gaytana knows, we work with, God, what's the company we work with, Gaytana, for all of our insurance? Aon.
Yeah, another Chicago-based company.
Yes. So we cannot start any production without that certificate of insurance.
Yeah. And so that's really, Darcie, the answer is, how many people get a copy of that? Not sure how to answer that one.
Okay, so would you recommend if a team member was hired on a project by a producer that they could ask the producer for a copy of the COI that shows that they are covered?
They can ask. I would ask your folks that are hiring those people, would you provide one to them?
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if you would or not, but they can ask.
Okay, anybody have any other questions for Ed?
I may be out of my league here, so I'm going to say something that I'm not 100% sure, but maybe Luigi actually might even know this too, and John. I believe that if you're paying your crew through a payroll company, sometimes they will cover the workman's comp.
Correct.
Yeah, so
that is correct.
So there are PEOs out there where, you know, you're a co-employer with your payroll company, and if they're providing the workers' comp, that is true. If the payroll company is just processing your payroll, that's not the case. But you would know that based on asking them for a certificate of insurance, and they would provide it to you as well. Yeah, it's a very, you know, confusing topic because every state is different, and it's a state regulated business. But a workers' comp policy is usually a workers' comp policy, no matter what state you're in.
And Darcie, all of us have been involved with projects that have canceled before there was COVID. And there should be cancellation language in every kind of terms and conditions that you, the photographer, or you, the agent, are making with the client. So now the question is, are we tweaking those are we tweaking that cancellation language to include the virus? You know, in general, if the client cancels, the client is responsible depending on, is it 24, 48, 72 hours out, and how many of the costs are they responsible for?
We actually had the first week of COVID, right? That was what, March 16th, we had lockdown. And I think we had a shoot scheduled right before they announced lockdown. So we were debating, like, do we continue the shoot? Do we not? So it was a tough decision. We went back to the photographer and they were super accommodating. Obviously, it was all so unknown at the time. So they normally would have charged us, you know, full cancellation fee. They went ahead and charged us half the cancellation because they already had the crew booked. And then just added a credit. So they said, you know, next time that you shoot with us, that'll go as a credit, just because it was so unknown. So luckily that was the only cancellation that we had, like, right before lockdown. So again, I do think you put that in writing, but given that this was a very new situation at the time, just based on relationships, we kind of just negotiated and talked through it.
That's great. And that's the way we hope it would always go, but we also know that's not always going to be the case. So I think one of the things that I discovered when I was doing research for this panel was that in the end, the insurance piece isn't enough to cover some of these really large shoots, and that really it's going to come down to the contract and what's been agreed upon. So I think there's probably, and Juliet will speak to this, but probably going to be another panel with a contract lawyer to come that will talk about some of the verbiage and things that need to be in a contract for protection during these times. Okay, so I'm going to move on. We took up quite a bit of time with those first two questions, and we've got 3 to go. So let's do it. All right, so question number 3. Searching for your plan B, C, and D. If you are a photographer, have you thought about a plan B? If you were to get sick and test positive for COVID a day or 2 before a confirmed shoot, or felt symptoms the morning of the shoot. If yes, please share some examples of ideas you have for resolution. And Melanie, let's start with you.
Okay. I mean, I have tested, and I'm sure the rest of us on the panel, photographer-wise, have tested as well, remote shooting, and maybe have done some of it as well, where you can literally be on live view on the camera. You have an assistant who you've hired, one of your best people on set, to be able to take over and actually be holding the camera while I look through on live view from home and direct. Because I move around so much, I need to be on a live view to be able to direct left, right, up, down, change the lens, et cetera, et cetera. And it works really, really well. You just have to have a digital tech and a first assistant that work really well together and that are completely, you know, you're your production, your pre-production has to be really, really tight as well. You have to really, really know what you're going after. Location needs to be scouted with those people, et cetera, et cetera. So you're kind of doing the legwork before. You have to do a lot of the legwork before the shoot with that. But that way, I mean, I'm literally shooting that way. And I can actually click the shutter on my computer via Capture One. And it's a really great way to do it. Because it is almost like, I mean, I have eyes on every moment that's happening. And I think you also have to have a backup of a local shooter. I mean, my agency, Sarah Laird and the company, has people West Coast, East Coast, and in different markets. So I think another backup solution would be to have another photographer on hold, just to pick up the slack in case I do get sick, that they can just be inserted into that equation. I mean, that's worst case scenario, I think. I mean, I think, like, for me, my preferred backup plan would be me shooting remotely. I'm not sure if I explained the remote setup well enough, but do you think I did?
That might be more for Liz and Art. Was she technical enough? Did she give you an idea?
Technical enough?
I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Excellent. So that's what I would do, you know, and it also depends on, I mean, every shoot for me is so different. It's not like I only do one thing. So my pre-production and my teams are different for these situations, you know, and I think for a bigger job with a bigger cast of characters, and when there's a lot on the line, your backup plan has to be an ABC situation. So you're really ready to go in case something, a worst case scenario, actually comes true.
Yeah, I agree. And Art, you've got some thoughts around that.
Well, I don't want to skip ahead to question number 4, but this is really about getting buy-in from the client to get them to cover the costs of having a second photographer on hold, because you might love your first assistant as an assistant, but wouldn't necessarily want to put the camera in his or her hands. And getting through the approval process of, just getting the job yourself, and then having to have somebody that the client approves as a second shooter is not going to be easy. And then if there's testing involved, that backup photographer has to be tested as well. And for example, I'm being tested tomorrow morning for a shoot on Saturday. So I intend to, get tested and hide under my desk for 3 days and not speak to anybody. But this is the tough question. This is plan B, C, and D. And I just don't know that clients are prepared to pay for plan B and C and D, because that's the insurance policy. The insurance policy is just backing up yourself. And, I love the idea of the first assistant shooting, but that then means that the first assistant is down an assistant on the set. So now you're backing up an assistant and a photographer, and it just kind of, mushrooms like, throwing a pebble into a still pond.
Art, if I could just kind of build on that, because so the conversations that you're having on that side of the camera, we're having with clients and advertisers on the other side to say, listen, you have to, whatever photographer you want to work with and production company, you have to ask them how they would approach this. And then how would you handle it and understand what those costs are? So I think it's just something from an industry perspective, and as agents start, working more with agents and agencies and start sort of doing more work, it's something the clients need to be educated on, because you're not doing this, you're not adding an extra sandwich to your craft service. Like, these are things that have to happen in order to shoot safely, in order to continue the shoot in some cases. So I think the more these conversations happen, the more clients are brought into them and given options and understand what their choices are. I think that's better for our way of working in general as we move forward.
Mhm.
And it runs into direct conflict with the economics of shooting right now,
Yeah.
which is, oh, crew has to be smaller. Oh, we have reduced budgets. Oh, we don't have a pre-light day. So there are all kinds of conflicting economics around trying to do a production today.
And what's great is that if you, Gaytana, like you said, if you have that conversation early on, start it right at the bidding process so that everyone's on the same page throughout the process, because it is, Art, you're absolutely right. This shoot I was referring to earlier, it would have been a huge shoot, but we had to keep crew down. We had to keep everything down because of COVID. And at the same time, it adds time, it adds money, it adds complexities that we haven't really dealt with before. So what's great is that if you have a client, if you're working with an agency or a client who are willing to work with you, I have not had anybody combative about it. I have not had anybody that said, well, that's for you to figure out. But it is something that collectively, I think, is a conversation that everyone has to have from the get.
I was working on an assignment with Liz where we were bidding it out, and we were having those, this was more of kind of a commercial advertising assignment, and we had backup for every single talent that we had coming in consideration for the shoot. So all the models had backup. So there are conversations that need to be had just so that this way everybody knows. There's certain, timing of when you start testing people and releasing people and kind of making sure that you're all kind of set up. For example, I had a shoot where one of my artists was remote directing a motion spot, and we ended up testing a couple days beforehand, and the DP and the gaffer both tested positive. So we kind of built it into our schedule, having those conversations with the producers and the client and the agency, so that this way we had enough time in order to replace people before actually getting to the shoot. So those were kind of the steps and precautions that we were taking to ensure that if we do encounter a hiccup, we're going to be okay to continue moving forward when the shoot actually is slated to start. I think we were also talking about just like the timing that people have going leading up. The more you can kind of build, the more you can kind of figure out if you can postpone the shoot if something were to happen where the photographer wasn't able, or one of the key players. If you're doing an advertising shoot, let's say for a fashion brand, when the key model talent is a celebrity, but then the celebrity gets sick, there's so many different pieces outside of just the photographer that are going into these big production shoots. So everything kind of needs to, those conversations need to happen in advance.
And there's a question from Jason Little asking, are you putting holding fees into your budget? Are you paying people to be on standby as a second person?
Yes, and it depends on the client and the job and what the client feels comfortable to approve. I think that's part of what we were saying before. It's that conversation to make sure that everybody's coming together to figure out what the best approach is. I think we all want to make sure that we're ensuring a safe shoot, and I think the only way that we can really do that is testing beforehand, building in timelines, and seeing how far you can push things if that were an option. And as Melanie was saying before, the virtual shooting, I think, is a really great opportunity to kind of keep things moving with productions.
And also getting some things approved in advance, remote fittings.
Totally.
Add a lot of time, so you have, talk to the talent about their wardrobe and ship wardrobe and get that wardrobe shipped back. So I've had a couple of situations where we've said, okay, well, we're going to approve these locations so that we can get them prepped, and we're going to approve talent kind of even before, the job is going to award, but even before the job actually awards, so that you can get moving on stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember, just, we're tackling what if, do you have a plan B for a photographer testing positive, but, a lot of plan Bs just start with, okay, we're going to shoot this outside. And that's great, but I've now built a a seamless studio in a driveway in Malibu and a garage in Encino. And, you know, when you're out there, you know, subject to the elements, the wind and the sun specifically, and the talent is ready at, I don't know, noon or 1, right when the sun is overhead, you now need more crew to make sure that that little tent that you've built doesn't collapse on your talent. So your plan B is not just about, and your plan C and D, they're not just about kind of COVID testing. They're about every single aspect of the job and thinking through. We are creative problem solvers. We have been since the beginning of time, but now we just have more creative problems to solve. You know, so buy rope, tie down your tents.
That's exactly what me and Liz are going through right now with an upcoming production that we're working on, where we're going to be shooting outside on location by the beach. And so we need the hands, and we need to make sure that we can hold out the production. And as we're being cognizant of reducing our crews and making sure that we're really nimble, you still need the people in order to do the things that you need to do to ensure, you know, of course not getting sick, but physically being safe, because then we're gonna have to call up Ed and be like, okay, we need workers' comp because a piece of equipment fell on somebody.
I've got a question. I'm just wondering, like, with this question that's been asked, do we feel when we're doing our creative calls, usually we're talking about the artistic direction, we're talking about sets, we're talking about spirit, we're talking about mood, and then everyone's like, oh great, can't wait to see your treatment, blah, 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 blah. And then when we are working on the treatment, the producer then puts in, whoever's bidding the job with us, will put in their section on the COVID protocol and the steps that the production will take to keep the crew safe, the medic, and all of those things. And we'll also put a little support, written support, so the estimate will reflect what areas of the estimate are for COVID protection. But we still have not had, like, we've had a lot of calls. We've been staying pretty, you know, on and off busy during COVID. And it's only been one pitch that we had where that came up from the agency side. Well, yeah, it's like, you know, what would we do? What would your plan B be? Or how would we handle that? And I'm just wondering, as myself, the photographer that's on a call, having my agent on the call, it's like, who brings up that part? And when do you bring that question up? Like, would you guys like, is it after, is it like the agent that then follows up with the art buyer and says, hey, you know, do you want us to put in, you know, are you asking for any type of information that we should put in on a plan B in case something were to go wrong? Or how is that subject brought up when you don't want to bring it up on necessarily a creative call because you want to keep the momentum purely creative and get the spirit across? So then whose job is it to kind of talk through how do you address that so that you can put a line number in? So if you are going to be remote shooting, if in case that's your plan B, you know, you might need to have a little extra crew. So that would be a plan B line item, but you would want to be able to have that conversation before doing the estimate so that you can have a plan B line item to help for protection. And I'm just wondering, is that something that I should be bringing up on the call? Is it something that the agency brings up on the call? Is it something that happens after the creative call that's between art buyer, producer, art buyer, agent, art buyer, photographer, or whoever, producer from the agency? Like, how is that addressed so that you can put the numbers in? So we can put the numbers in, or also a small paragraph. If they ask for it, they understand what the plan B is.
Gaytana, do you have thoughts around that?
I have thoughts around that, funnily enough. Yeah, I think on a creative call, first of all, I think the creatives at agencies aren't thinking about this either. They're thinking, what will, you know, have the most impact? How do we do this beautifully? I think in most cases, it's probably your agent and your producer having the conversation with the art producer and starting that dialogue. And art producers should be having conversations with the account leads and the brand leads on the client side to understand, does the client have any, you know, protocol that they want to make sure we have, or, you know, are there any parameters that they want to address? So I think the agency art buyer serves as that middle person. And I think that's probably the right place for it to sit, because the onus, I think, should be on the agency to make sure that they're getting the communication from you on how you're bidding it and then feeding it back to the client. And I think Art said it too, you know, this is a problem solving industry. So clients sometimes, it's not that they're not thinking about keeping it safe, they just don't even think about it. They're like, sure, we assume you're going to figure it out. And then when you call out all of these things, you know, it's like sending your kids to school. You assume the school's taking care of it, but when you really see what the teachers have to go through each day, it's like, oh, okay, you know, you pay more attention to that. And I think this is kind of the same thing.
Liz, I think it's really important for us to continue to attempt to keep the art and the commerce separate. Let Luigi be the bad cop. I mean, he looks kind of like a bad cop. And
it's the beard. The beard always does it.
It's terrifying. And also, but Liz, also be prepared if it comes up on the creative call. You cannot be the person on the call who just throws up her hands and goes, I don't know, that's all Luigi. You know, I'm healthy. So that you're straddling this line of being, you know, prepared to answer the question, but also just wanting to be the person, you know, with whom they're dealing with creatively.
Right. And I think it's clear, like, there isn't one answer. I mean, what we're doing today is we're talking about solutions and talking about, let's talk about it. So getting to a place where you're comfortable talking with your agent, they're comfortable talking with the producer, and the trickle down, and everybody, all the relationships are talking about it. And there is a situation where some of the plan B, C, or D needs to come into play. It's been talked about. And it's not like, oh shit, what are we gonna do, you know? Liz, real quick, before you move on, you had just said some interesting things on the call yesterday with me and Luigi about sort of having a core group of photographers that you trust locally, just because you in particular have been shooting locally in Atlanta, not in LA or New York so much since COVID has happened. And I liked that concept, and I just wanted to see if you could share that.
I think it's the same. It hits back to Melanie, I think, paraphrased an ideal situation of being able to shoot remotely. But for me here in Atlanta, where my core support group of my digital tech and my first assistants, my digital tech completely solid with the way that he knows, so I've been shooting here now several months, knows the colors, knows the curves, and we communicate really clearly. But as far as for me personally, giving the camera to like my first assistant, I'm not sure if that's like for me the right way, but I do feel that I have locally here some peers that I've known and whose work I like, and that also are kind of versatile shooters that can work either outside with strobe or without strobe, or studio with strobe. And I think I would be very clearly, the way that Melanie had paraphrased so perfectly, be the creative director of my vision, but maybe I would prefer to have a photographer that's here that's maybe more used to shooting, more working in a shooting situation, working with clients and whatnot. For me here, that's probably the way that I would work. I think when you're based in one city, when you've spent most of your most of the last 10 years has been shooting either in LA or in New York, so coming back to Atlanta to shoot, it's been it's kind of like a new beginning, but still with a lot of roots that have been there for many, many years. So I feel fortunate that coming home and shooting home has been pretty smooth for me. So yeah, but I think for me that would be kind of my approach, would be more to work remotely, but probably have maybe another photographer kind of help me with that actual physicality of holding the camera and whatnot.
Yeah. Okay,
but
great.
I think it goes back though to what Melanie, we all have the consistent crew. So no matter where you are, it's like the people that develop relationships with their first assistants, second assistants, their digital techs. It's like they basically know you, they know me, they know the way I like to light, they know the gear list, they already have a nice perception as far as kind of the formula. Whether we're shooting outside, there's a formula in some way. There may be some variations to it, but there's certain formulas, as opposed to starting with scratch with people that don't know your formula, that aren't aware of your visual kind of vision.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Cindy, you and I had talked a little bit about, how are you preparing the client for these times and these situations? And you brought up something that was so smart, and that was around keeping everyone calm. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in a really unique position. So I'm almost like the middleman, right, between our brand marketing leads and our agency. So I hear both sides on every single shoot we produce. And I always find that there needs to be some calm person on each production. So I've worked with producers that are super high strung and they really make the client super nervous. So regardless of how beautiful the shot is, the client is on edge because that producer is just not calm and constantly asking like, how are we on time? And I'm like, everyone just calm down. Like, you know, they will alert us if we're going overtime. But I always find, like, especially in production, if you aren't calm, then I think you're in the wrong industry, because we have to be nimble. We have to just go with the flow, I always say. And this is the time that we're in right now. So if you couldn't handle, you know, this before COVID, then I just don't think you're in the right industry. So I always like to keep our agency calm and our client. So I find that there needs to be one person on a shoot that can do that.
Hopefully more than one. Let's get on to number 4. Question number 4, how do I get these numbers approved? And we did touch on some of this already, but we've got some other things I'd really like to add in. Juliet, can you share Art's document that represents his PPE section that he's added to his bidding software? And Art, I'll let you speak to all of this.
Well, it became clear, you know, a couple of months ago when we all started going back to work, I'll use the term loosely, fairly regularly, that these were new line items that, you know, people hadn't really seen before, or actually could distinguish between. You know, what is the difference between a set medic and a COVID compliance officer? You know, what is crew testing? What is concierge testing? What is on-set testing? So being able to call all of this stuff out and being able to describe it and having it in your back pocket built into your bidding software is absolutely huge. And as we've all touched on, it then becomes really about what can the client bear and what are they willing to bear? And whether they've been my shoots or other shoots I've heard about, there is somebody that is, or some entity that is leading the safety discussion, whether it's the agency or the client or the producer or the talent. Somebody is staking out a safety position and everybody else kind of falls in line. And if nobody else is, then it's up to you, the photographer, and your tolerance. So having these things kind of enumerated and separate and distinct, incredibly important.
Do you want to speak to about any of these sections in particular, or do you think they're pretty much understood by our viewers?
Well, I will make the distinction between the first two, and then I'll describe the third. The difference between a medic, which has been around since, you know, production started to, you know, want to make sure that there was somebody on set with Band-Aids and vitamin B. Everybody knows a set medic is usually a trained, you know, paramedic of some kind. The COVID compliance officer is really, and there is certification, is really about somebody who is there to make sure that you are 6 feet apart, that you're wearing your masks, that you're not, you know, dropping your mask to eat or drink on set. And the way I've, you know, heard it described is that the set medic could do this, and I've been on sets where the set medic does do this, but if somebody has an accident and the set medic is drawn to that person and has to deal with that person, then COVID compliance goes out the window. So again, it's how deep a bench do you really want to have? And I think item number 3, set and location cleaning, that's really important to understand as well. Are we talking about paying to clean the set before the shoot, during the shoot, or after the shoot? Because I've had a Ghostbusters guy with a fogging machine on one of my jobs. you know, and that's its own specialty. And there's arguments as to the right way to do that. Are we wiping stuff down? Are we fogging it with, you know, negative ions or positive ions, or positive and negative ions? And then the difference between, you know, crew testing in advance and concierge testing, where you've hired a testing company and your entire crew is going to the testing service before the shoot, or the granddaddy of them all, on set rapid testing, which is just crazy expensive.
Right.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Juliet, do we have any questions about that have come in that would be worth talking about?
I don't see a specific question on that, though. I think Matt Harbridge had something. Let me find him. Continue.
Okay.
Okay, wait, I found him. Allowed to talk. Matt, I'm going to let you talk. You're unmuted. Did you have your hand up, Matt? Okay.
Looks like he is muted.
All right. Ask to unmute. Matt.
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, we will continue.
Okay. If he pops in, we'll go back. Luigi, you had some really great thoughts around this. I'm going to let you go.
Yeah, well, I think that Art did a really great job kind of sharing those kind of line items and what that means. And that definitely goes into the pre-production of getting everything kind of together to go to the agency and the client. But, you know, I guess one other thing that I've had happen on my sets is kind of, you know, the delineation of COVID compliance, set medic. You know, there's also daily health and safety talks that we try to do in the morning on every shoot, so that this way everybody is aware of the constraints of the shoot, depending on the size, you know, where are the designated areas where you are allowed to remove your mask and eat, and how is that separated from the shooting area. So there's certain things like that. I think in our estimating, you know, talking about it with like Liz or another one of my artists, we kind of figure out, well, can we really achieve this in a 10-hour day? Do we need to estimate everybody at a 12-hour day instead? So there's certain things like conversations of that nature that we're having, so that we're aware of how do we actualize the creative of what the agency and client is after. So that, you know, sometimes there is a budget in order to have a pre-light, and maybe we can shoot one of the talent on the pre-light day and get everything, all the kinks worked out for the virtual presence, so that on the main day when we have the celebrity talent, let's say, everything is really smooth in order to kind of move forward. So, you know, it's about creativity and joining together in order to kind of figure that all out. Just, you know, we were talking about shooting on location and how that might require additional hands, but also if you're going to be in a studio, like take into consideration the number of people that you're going to have on set. Is your studio big enough in order for you to house everybody and to kind of have a separate breakout room for maybe the client to be in with the video village, so they don't necessarily have to be on set? So those are other things that, you know, I've kind of encountered and I wanted to share with the group. And I think one of the most important things that I will say, and I think John was touching on this before, and also Ed, you know, every shoot is very specific to the location in which they are. So if you're shooting in Atlanta versus New York or LA or Vancouver, I think it's really important to have trusted producers that know the rules and regulations that you're up against, because it's that relationship, that trust level, that then you can bring back to the agency client to make sure that everybody feels really comfortable moving forward and producing the shoot. I guess one of the other things, I'm just kind of like looking at my notes and things that we've talked about, and I think that John also hit on this before, there's so much work that goes into a pre-production of a shoot. So one tactic that I've kind of used is, you know, separating out the estimate for pre-production. So if you know that you have locations and casting that needs to be done, you can kind of start working on that in advance before we get to the actual award of the photographer. And this is kind of more in the instance if there were to possibly be another kind of state mandated shutdown of where you're shooting. So that this way, you know, the location scouting and all the model research that you've done, the casting, those can kind of be held until the agency client feels comfortable again in order to continue on with the shoot. So that was another thing I wanted to kind of bring to the table as well.
Anyone have any questions about what Luigi just said?
I don't have questions, but I just want to say sort of what Art, the breakup that Art showed, along with everything that Luigi said, is everything that our producers should be taking to the client. So the clients could see all of this work and all of this transparency that has gone into it and make sure they're completely aligned and comfortable with the plan as they move forward. So I think the more clarity you have around it, the easier you are as you move into production with any changes that happen.
One other thing I'd add too, guys, is that locations are now also, you know, we just did this Mercedes project that I was talking about, and we shot in Charleston at their Vans facility. That facility in and of itself had their own protocol above and beyond what we had to deal with. So even getting crew in and out of the facility from one building to the next, to the next, temp checks, testing, specific face masks. So this facility actually mandated that we wear their face masks. So no matter how, you know, what kind of gear you had, it didn't matter. You had to wear their face mask. You had to get a wristband. You had to get a temp check. So, you know, there is just, again, more complexity. In a lot of ways, though, it does, you know, the pre-pro for this stuff seems to be, you got to be buttoned up. So by the time you get to set, it does work to your advantage in a lot of ways. And you know, I think some of that is painting a rosy picture trying to get through all this. But, you know, it really does, you do have to plan for everything. And, you know, Luigi was talking about kind of siloing conversations. That seems to be a lot of what's going on, you know. And we've, I jokingly say, oh, well, we're talking about a different shoot all the time, right? So it's like, you know, you have your studio shoot that then is like, oh no, now it's going to be on the beach. And we're going to shoot it at night, but now we're going to shoot it in the morning, or, you know, sunrise, sunset. So just more variables, and, you know, outdoors is easier in a lot of ways, except for lighting.
You also had a really great point about coming up with more affordable solutions, because we are kind of working in a situation where the budgets are less, but we need more to get these things accomplished, getting really creative in how we accomplish things. You had a great suggestion about using some software in a different way. Yeah.
Oh, so I had a client who asked for Q-Take, which is, you guys probably know it. It's a very expensive software that motion broadcast uses, and it's, you know, it's cost per seat, and it's pretty expensive. We recently had a shoot where we used Google Meet, which worked actually splendidly, and then had a separate archive, so that they could see capture as it was happening once we got our lighting set. And then we also had everything archived. So if the creative director wanted to go back to something previously, it was all there archived, just you know, in a different system. But Google Meet worked really, really well. And you know, the client was really happy because they didn't have to spend 10 grand on a seat for Q-Take or whatever it is.
And Cindy, you also had some ideas around shifting the way you do things to be more cost effective.
Yeah, I just, you know, there's always, with the situation that we're in, costs have gone up, right? In certain aspects, but there are, you know, perks to this, that we have less client, less agency on set. So do we really need to have that fully blown catering and craft services that we always do? So there are some perks in being able to cut production costs. We're also cutting back on all travel, obviously, right now. We've got a shoot coming up for a large 2-week production. So obviously being virtual for a day or 2 or 3 days is okay. Being virtual for 2 weeks it's difficult. It's, you know, especially in my role when I need to communicate with the food stylist. So again, you can save on costs like travel, catering, but then I am finding that not all production companies, but some are kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say taking advantage of the situation, but are really upping their costs for safety, which is understandable. But, you know, that is something we have to question too, right? Like, are all of these line items important? But again, going back to the conversation of making sure that our brand leads are aware and understand. So again, it's all about being open and honest and having those conversations with all parties.
Okay, we are at question 5. Juliet, do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. How can I secure business during COVID? So I'm going to start with the photographers. What would you say have been your best tactics for securing new business during these challenging times? Liz, let's start with you.
Well, I think at the start of COVID, when everything went kind of radio silent and we were all trying to figure out what to do and how this was going to affect us and whether it was going to be 1 month, 2 months. And at that time I was thinking, oh, this will be over by like June, we'll be fine. The first thing I did was I was like, you know, for me personally, I was like, well, we don't have any, we don't have any work right now, but maybe what I could do is just kind of look at my circle and where can I put myself at use as we're trying to figure out how to navigate through this time. And, you know, I have one employee that's with me and she's kind of she'd be my production studio manager and also kind of my designer that helps with all the treatments and helps with all of the things that we need to do today to get these jobs. So decided right away to just hold on to her because I felt like it takes, you know, instead of like, oh, I have to like cut all my costs, I was like, no, you know, we need to stay looking up, looking forward, and kind of trying to find ways to navigate through this time as we're trying to figure it out. So we did 2 things. One thing, I looked at my LinkedIn and I was like, wow, boy, people are really on LinkedIn right now because everyone's trying to find work. Everyone's trying to just kind of figure things out. My LinkedIn was a real weak LinkedIn. I had never really put too much emphasis or too much thought into it. So that was one thing. I kind of had somebody help me kind of pimp my LinkedIn, kind of get that LinkedIn back up and strong because people were looking at LinkedIn. Everybody was looking at LinkedIn. So kind of focused on that. And then really with my family, I was like, well, how, you know, we could actually be shooting right now. I could be shooting because my partner is a wardrobe stylist. My daughter's a makeup artist. My son is an actor/model. Like, you know, we could possibly find some ways to still create content. And about that same time, I had, you know, inquiry from Refinery 29 to say, hey, you know, we want to celebrate moms and can you kind of show us what's going on in your household during this quarantine period? And I really took that as an opportunity to spur new creativity, celebrating my family, celebrating what we had to offer as a family, but also make the images kind of not just like average pictures. I really wanted to make the pictures something that I'd feel proud of and that I could use also to showcase in my work. So that was, you know, just staying busy shooting and then working with my agent and Claudia to take work that we maybe hadn't celebrated that much. We kind of worked on creating some selling PDFs, and I'll let kind of Luigi talk about it, but kind of like instead of just sitting here and waiting for the phone to ring, we stayed busy. Claudia was busy helping me look at work that's been archived, working it into layouts, working it into fun selling concept PDFs or presentations for Luigi to send out, and then also doing a little bit of selling on us as a family during these times, how we could possibly produce work safely within a family unit, which would be myself and the team that I had here that was my immediate family. So
I like to call it your quarantine. Because, you know, it's the people that you were with. And I think that the Refinery 29 piece that you did, not only was it beautiful, it was basically a built-in capabilities deck. You know, here's Liz and here's who she is, here's her work style, this is what she has at her fingertips, her partner and her children, her beautiful home. These are all locations and things that are in her bubble that are safe, that people can tap into in order to continue to create work. So I worked closely with Liz on coming up with ideas of who this would be right for. And I think that's the best way to kind of secure new business or just secure business during these times. You know, what are you comfortable with? What do you have at your fingertips? And who would go for it? Who would be interested in seeing this? And then there's something that we talk about at BNA all the time is like, you need to be solution providers. You need to help the client and agency help you help them. So with this idea of a capabilities deck, we really were able to secure interest in clients, and some people weren't ready to really start shooting. So, you know, we had that outreach, and that was just positivity that just could kind of carry on and continue moving forward. So I've kind of done that with all of my artists, and I would encourage the photographers that are listening, like kind of look at what's around you and what you can offer and use that to your advantage. I think the other thing that's really important right now to kind of secure business during COVID is having those open and honest and sometimes tough conversations. But, you know, Melanie was saying it before, and as was Art, like, you learn a lot from being on set or virtually on set during these types of shoots. So sharing some of those stories, you know, me as an agent with an art buyer is like, oh, we encountered this. This is how we overcame it. You know, sharing stories and kind of just having that commonality with people will kind of, what Cindy was saying, put people at ease. You know, having that calm person on set, you know, you're building that team and kind of setting the production up for success in order to, you know, secure that business and kind of move forward from there. So.
That's great, thank you. I mean, and one thing I noticed about at the beginning of the quarantine, and Liz came out with the Refinery 29, I think that what happened was she developed a momentum for herself. People are like, oh gosh, she's shooting, nobody's shooting, she's shooting. Like, and it was beautiful and it was exciting. And then it was like, when people slowly started being ready to shoot, they intuitively thought of her because she's already doing it. And then you were doing it for clients, and then clients were like, well, we did it with her last time, let's do it again. And I think it's really been powerful for you in keeping that momentum going and never really taking that break that I think a lot of us did. So I think that's been really powerful. Melanie and Art, do you guys want to speak to your tactics on getting work in these times?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of the same kind of stuff Liz was talking about. What did you call it, Luigi? A capabilities deck?
Mm-hmm.
You know, where we put something together that showed my house, my kids, my dogs, my neighborhood, my blah, 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 all that stuff. You know what I mean? And sent that out to a bunch of people and, you know, bid on a bunch of stuff with projects that had to be shot at home, you know? So that stuff is really, really good to have as a photographer right now. I think it's good to have some sort of a deck where you can show your, like Luigi said so beautifully, capabilities. And we've just done e-blasts and tons of outreach. I mean, I need outreach to personal people that I know in the industry as well. I don't know, we've just been like shoving stuff out, you know, basically just trying to keep it going. And, you know, some stuff has worked really, really well. Some stuff not, you know, I'm not going to lie and say it hasn't been easy sailing. I mean, it's been rough. I've been slow. But we keep going and we keep doing the next right thing and pushing it out there, you know, and you know, if you build it, they will come, as they say, right?
Agreed.
Sure.
How about you, Art?
Liz, Luigi, and Melanie have covered it fantastically. I mean, we are all in the pushing the rock up the mountain business, and the rock just got bigger and weirder shaped, and the mountain got steeper.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, totally.
being able to put together what I started doing in May was getting on Zoom calls with my entertainment clients and showing them what, you know, we had been up to and what we were capable of. And a lot of our clients who haven't been shooting in any genre are, in their parents' basement in Vermont, or dealing with two kids that aren't in school in New Jersey, or hiding in Idaho, and they're like, oh yeah, why we may need to shoot, and what's that going to be like? So I've always also said we're in the education business, and that means that we have to, whether you call it problem solving or solutions or education, it's up to us to say, this is what is going on right now, and this is what we're capable of. And the problem solving is endless, because I have heard tell of a client who told the photographer, you have to wear a face shield. And it's pretty difficult to focus a camera through a face shield. So you're in the negotiating for goggles business, but just even being able to have a goggles discussion is hugely important. And last but not least, realizing that for the foreseeable future, the portfolio might be dead, because where are we sending it? Where are we taking it? And for, Liz and Luigi be able to cull the archive and, create PDFs and update your website and continuing to either generate new work or give the appearance that you are refreshing is huge as well.
Agreed. Okay, and so then I want to say to the client side, what have been the most reassuring contributions from a photographer during COVID that have made you feel secure that your shoot would go smoothly? Is there anything a photographer could offer during the bidding process that would make you want to consider them over competing photographers? Gaytana or Cindy?
I'll jump in first, Cindy, and then if you want to take it. So I think in most situations, we're seeing the advertisers are still relying on the recommendations of their agency, and the agency is still sort of staying in contact, and the agency want everything, everyone on this panel is saying, the agency wants to see makers who are making, photographers who continue to be innovative and continue to do their personal work in time. So I think that's something that agencies are looking for. And then when it comes to comfort level, clients do sometimes want to know if a photographer has produced anything during COVID, and what their protocol is. So I think, again, everything that Luigi, John, this whole team has said is, sharing that with the client, whether that's, a separate document that goes with your treatment and your estimate, but just giving all of that information so they understand the steps that you'll take for safety.
Oh, absolutely. And just to chime in on that, for us too, it's really important about trusting that photographer. So are we bringing in a photographer into our studio that I know has been traveling and taking all of these photos, which understandably so, right? You need to build your portfolio. But for us on the client side, right now, it's mostly about trusting that photographer and that crew. So that puts us at ease, knowing that I know this photographer has been quarantining for 3 months in Chicago. So for us, that's super important too, if we are on set with them. So just something to keep in mind with the client side as well.
Okay, great. Well, I think that is about, that wraps us up for our questions. Do we have questions from our viewers?
The only other question I would add is that somebody was asking about how to reach photographers during this time. Has somebody on a crew or assistant reaching out to photographers, and any thoughts on that?
Art.
Yes. I've always said that assistants have photographers for clients, and photographers have, creatives for clients, and creatives have bosses. And it's up to the assistants to continue to reach out to us, because the truth is, in my circle, my pool of assistants, we've had 2 or 3 leave town. A couple, are attending to their parents. A couple don't want to deal with getting off of unemployment. And then, like Liz and Melanie, you're working with, the top assistants, on both coasts, so they're busy. So, there could be an opportunity. You just continue to have to find that balance of being persistent without being annoying. So yes, continue to reach out, not to me, but to Liz and Melanie.
Well, I have to say, I really, community is the key part of what's going to keep everybody sane in all this. It's important to us. It's important. We hope that people will join APA, but even if you just attend things like this, it's really helpful. I really greatly appreciate all of you who were willing to be here today. It means a lot to be able to share the knowledge, especially right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darcie.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Darcie.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.